Hello and welcome back to Busting the Backlog, the series where I chip away at my obnoxiously large backlog in the hopes of making some good content. Today, we're looking at ScourgeBringer. ScourgeBringer is a 2D hack-and-slash platforming roguelite developed by Flying Oak Games. The game originally caught my interest because it was described as a combat-focused Celeste, and Celeste is one of my favorite games. And upon checking out some footage, I can see where they're coming from. The game's overall movement is built around the player character's omnidirectional dash attack. So does it hold up? Let's take a look. And by now, you know the deal. Like and subscribe if you enjoy, check out the main channel for weeb stuff, and follow my socials down below. Gotta do the YouTube plugs. Let's move on. I'm not gonna spend too much time on aesthetic stuff, but I think the game looks and sounds amazing. I'm always a fan of pixel art with smooth animations. I love the enemy designs. I think every single enemy is distinct and interesting. And the game has this high energy metal soundtrack that amps up whenever you're in combat. I'm a big metal guy, so this is right up my alley. I'll have the soundtrack playing in the background, so make up your own mind. ScourgeBringer is set in a post-apocalyptic setting where basically everything's fucked and the player is sent to go through the ordeal, which nobody has ever returned from. And the idea is that the ordeal is somehow connected to the Scourge, which is what destroyed civilization. So your goal is to go in, figure out why everything's fucked, and hopefully unfuck it. So that's the basic setup. The control scheme is pretty simple. Starting out, you have the basic movement and attacks that you see in a lot of platformers, with the notable elements being a wall run and a dash attack, the latter of which has a very short cooldown and is meant to be used both as a combat tool and a mobility tool, though notably you do not get any invincibility frames while dashing. Combat is likewise pretty simple at its core. Your basic light attack is going to be your primary damage dealer, with the dash attack being used mostly for positioning and gap closing. You also have access to a strong attack which, after a short delay, will knock enemies back, destroy projectiles, and if the enemy has an exclamation mark above them, it'll interrupt whatever attack they were preparing for and stun them, which will give you a chance to get a bunch of free damage off. You also have access to a gun which will auto-aim. It has limited ammo which can be recharged by damaging enemies with your sword. The challenge of the combat system comes from having to quickly react to what's happening in a room that's filled with enemies and adjusting your tactics to the unique circumstances you'll find yourself in. When you die, you'll go to a hub world where you can spend the judge's blood currency on permanent upgrades. Some of them are relatively minor, like a health upgrade, but some of them can be game-changing, such as the ability to reflect projectiles back at enemies with the strong attack, or the ability to combine the dash and strong attack, which is really useful in a lot of situations. But overall, the core loop is simple. Play, die, upgrade, repeat. Combat itself feels very nice. You really feel every impact, you have a lot of control over how you move around, and once you start getting the hang of it, you'll feel like a god, because you'll be able to blitz through combat segments flying around the room, and it's awesome. There's definitely an element of easy to pick up, hard to master, as the game is genuinely hard. You'll definitely be getting wrecked for a while until it all starts to come together. The one thing I will criticize about the combat is it has a sense of stickiness, especially in the air, and not always to its benefit. In some cases, it's great because when you're jumping from enemy to enemy, it feels like the game understands your intention and helps you do what you were trying to do. In other cases, it likes to correct your movement in ways you absolutely don't want. For example, if an enemy is positioned close to a level hazard like spikes or poisonous gas, it's not uncommon for your attacks to pull you into the traps, causing unfair damage. Or once you unlock the ground attack, which adds an extra AoE effect when you dash into the ground, any downward dash will basically magnet you towards the ground, which is oftentimes a very not good thing. And when you're slashing an enemy and want to dash away because they're charging up an uninterruptible attack, you need to first jump away and then dash, because otherwise the dash will drag the enemy with you. I've seen a couple of reviews talk about the stickiness and how it's one of the major negatives, so it's clear I'm not alone in this. That being said, I do think that a lot of it can be boiled down to gameplay quirks that you need to learn. I wouldn't actually say they're inherently bad game design, but I do feel like they raise the skill floor for no real benefit, and that is a shame. I always felt like any roguelike or roguelite is at its best when the player gets over the initial learning curve and the rest of their playtime is the journey from competency to mastery. Weirdness like ScourgeBringer has makes that moment take a bit longer to reach. The game has an interesting exploration system. Rather than the typical roguelike style of find the boss and only backtrack if you want the goodies, in ScourgeBringer the room to the boss or judge is sealed off at the start. You can only unlock it by seeking out and killing that zone's mini-bosses or guardians. Only one will spawn in the first two zones, but as you progress you'll have to fight more per zone. So there's a pretty standard expected length for each zone regardless of RNG. I kinda like it, though I imagine this may not appeal to everyone. Now, the one thing I really need to emphasize to the roguelike fans who are interested in this game is that randomness is not nearly as impactful as it is in other roguelikes. If you're looking for something like The Binding of Isaac, where your pickups fundamentally dictate how your run will go, this isn't the game for you. Most of what determines your success in this game is your mastery of that core combat system and your ability to learn what each enemy type does and how to deal with them. The only real pickups that matter are the guns you can buy from shops, which will each do different things that can be altered with modifiers the shops will sell. But keep in mind, the guns need to be recharged with melee combat, so it only really serves as a bonus. The other random thing you can get is an altar. One will spawn per zone, and you'll be able to choose one of 3 randomly selected blessings. These will always be good things, though sometimes there will be stipulations. So for example, you can find a blessing that'll give you a 50% damage boost, but only when your health is full. Or there's one that will boost your damage based on how much of the shop currency you have on you, which obviously will be less effective if you're buying stuff at the shops. And of course, there are some just straight upgrades as well, such as the one that increases enemy stun duration, or the one that automatically reveals shops on the map. On top of that, every time you clear a combat room, you have a chance to get a pickup, usually something fairly mundane. You can get a healing item, an ammo recharge, or a 5 to 10% boost to one of your damage types, or a slight cooldown reduction. So it's more of a sense of steady progression as you make your way through the game, rather than getting that one game-changing pickup. Though obviously if you're low on health, the RNG of whether you get a healing item, something else, or nothing is a pretty big factor. But this ties into my next point. While the game doesn't lean too heavily into the randomness factor of the genre, what it does do to keep things varied is add a couple different risk-reward elements to keep you pushing your limits. For starters, there are the optional combat trials, which have made appearances in tons of roguelikes. Basically, when you find a special altar, which may or may not spawn in each zone, activate it to fight an extended gauntlet of enemies, and if you succeed, you'll get a nice little collection of pickups and shop currency. Fail and, well, runs over. Another neat thing is that if you clear out every combat encounter in a zone, the game will give you a few free pickups as a reward for taking on the likely unnecessary risk. Additionally, there's a helpful little guy who will give you a reward if you can clear each zone within a certain time limit. If you really push yourself, it's possible to get both the completion reward and the time reward, though it is not easy at the best of times, and fucking forget it for the 3rd zone onwards. So that's something I like to see in games, an intrinsic motivator to improve. Even though I'm not even all that good at ScourgeBringer just yet, I definitely get the sense that the game wants me to master it, and I absolutely love that. As far as the story goes, I haven't completed the game yet, but the story so far has largely been delivered via lore books that you can find randomly throughout the zones. It's interesting, though a clear secondary to the gameplay. Story really shouldn't be a reason to play this game, so treat it as a nice little bonus. So overall, I am loving my time with ScourgeBringer, and I will absolutely keep playing it. I've been on a bit of an achievement hunting kick lately, so I could definitely see myself getting the 100% at some point. If you like simple but challenging, hyper-mobile combat accompanied by an absolutely banging soundtrack, then I can wholeheartedly recommend ScourgeBringer. Thanks for watching. Big thank you to my patrons, especially my God tier supporters Bulk Squad Thrust and Michael Rotolo. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more. Also, Twitter, Discord, and Patreon are down below, as is my main channel, which contains a lot more high-effort analysis. Once again, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time. Play the Electro Swing.
Hit the road, Jack, and don't you come back no more.